Good morning, everyone. In Business Law 2, I thought I'd put up some of my thoughts on Chapter 24, Liabilities of the Parties regarding commercial paper, negotiable instruments, and the special status of holder in due course. And that's why we really care about this subject more than we do about just traditional assignment of rights or delegation of duties. It's the special status that commercial paper can grant in a holder in due course that protects them with regard to being able to collect the obligation without having the party in liability be able to raise certain defenses. They're just not available to them. A holder in due course gets to go around traditional, what we call limited defenses, which are significant types of defenses, which we'll get to in a second. But it's that special ability to enforce the liability on a note or a draft that gives commercial paper its special status, or why we study it separately. So going over the chapter, it starts, there's primary liability in the paper and itself. The primary liability is with regard to the maker of a note and the drawee of a check, which would be a bank usually. The drawer and later endorsers of a draft have secondary liability in most circumstances, as does any endorser of a note. An endorser is someone other than sign it. If you sign it as the maker of a note, you have primary liability. It's kind of straightforward, I think, in that aspect of it. So secondary liability. Secondary liability is what we care for significantly in this chapter, maybe more than others, are the drawer of a check and unqualified endorser. So if I draw a check on my bank, Bank of America, and I make it out to you, you go and present it to the bank, and the bank accepts, but let's assume it's a time draft, it's going to be payable later in 10 days, and then they don't honor it 10 days later. Am I secondarily liable? Well, if my signature is on the front of the check, yes, I am. But who's the more likely secondary party we're concerned about? Is through later negotiations. Anybody that endorses the back of the check will bring up secondary liability as an endorser, unless they've done what? And I believe it was covered in the last chapter. They put restrictive endorsements on their signature, and restrictive endorsements without recourse. And the more thorough one is also without warranties, because even if you sign it without recourse, there are certain warranties that still pass with the instrument simply by passing it, unless you put that on the document. Without recourse and without warranties, then there is no liability. There's also no liability for anyone that passes it as bearer paper, meaning they never sign it. So basically, you have to have your signature on the instrument in order to have secondary liability or even primary liability. If your signature is not on the document, there generally is no liability attached whatsoever. And that kind of makes, I think, pretty much common sense. We know that if it's a draft, it has to be presented to the acceptor, which is usually the drawee, usually a bank, and then they have to be dishonored, and then they have to give reasonable notice to the secondarily liable parties, and that's usually done within 3 business days, 72 hours. I think it's 72 hours, but you get also the day it started on, you get that extra day because it's to be 3 full business days. The presentment is a demand on the drawee of acceptance of a draft, or demand on a maker of a note and say pay it, and if they deny that, they have to give notice to secondary liable parties so they can make good on it and or defend appropriately. Dishonor, notice of dishonor. And again, a notice of dishonor, a bank must give notice before midnight of the next business day after the bank's receipt. That's between one bank and another bank, not between endorsers and the original party. Agents, you should know liability of agents. We've covered this. Well, not all of you had me for Business Law 1, but we're going to go over it again probably in a later chapter. But when it comes to agency, if I say I'm working for a corporation and I am, I don't know, the registered agent, or I am authorized to cut checks for that entity or to make promissory notes, if I just sign it James Corman, I am going to have primary liability on that because I've endorsed the instrument in my own capacity. But if I put James Corman as agent for the Acme Real Estate Corporation, then I don't have any liability whatsoever. I'm only acting as a mere agent, unless I've done something illegal or fraudulent in some fashion. Will I be on the hook at all? I'm just basically a conduit through which I bound the principal. And I think I just said it was Acme Real Estate Company. And that's very important because agents often have a lot of power to go out and do things, but they don't want to be on the hook themselves. So they got to be very cautious. I actually had a small corporation own a building. my law office was at one time. And I always wanted to, take out a loan to own the building and do different things, but I always wanted to take out just in the corporate name. But they always wanted what we call recourse against the agent as well. So I'd have primary liability along with the corporation. So that's just a whole nother issue. But you get my point, is when you're signing as an agent, make sure you identify yourself as an agent acting on behalf of a principal in order for you as an agent to avoid liability. And vice versa, if you're the other party receiving the instrument, you may want to have that agent also be held accountable because you want multiple methods by which to make good on a whether it's a promissory note or a draft. You may want them to have individual liability as well. Grantors, I'm not nearly as concerned about that. Now the big thing, what's a holder in due course? Because why do we care about it later on? So I write out a check to you. I don't know, you painted my house or something like that. I wrote out a check to you for $5,000 payable to the order of you, Jane Doe. Jane doesn't hopefully sign the back of the check until she's ready to actually transfer, because once you sign the back of the check and it's just blank endorsement, we know that becomes bearer paper. It's almost like it's cash. Anybody that possesses it can cash it. It's a very important concept. But to become a holder in due course, say Jane doesn't have the time to get to the bank or whatever, she's holding a check, it's not stale, it's just maybe a week old, and she needs cash right away. She sees somebody and she sells it at a discount. So it's a $5,000 draft. If she sells it for something that's not shocking to the conscience, she sells it for $4,000 or $4,500 to somebody else because there's a risk it might not be collectible, and that person that buys it gets Jane Doe's endorsement on the back of the check, and let's assume it's not without any limitations, say without recourse or the waiver of all warranties, it's just basically an endorsement payable to the order of John Smith. Now John Smith, if they paid value, have no notice of any fraudulent aspect of the underlying transaction, that there may be a lack of consideration or other defenses to the collection of the note, John Smith will be deemed a holder in due course. So let me just make sure I've read the elements as the law has it. Yeah, for value, I already said that. Be careful about value. What if I, for example, sold you a draft that was on $5,000 and I sold it for $20? Does that make you have you satisfy the element of paying value? That's what I think there's an argument there, that if value is so askew from the underlying obligation in the note or draft, that might bring up certain suspicions that you're really not a good faith purchaser. I'm getting way too far, but generally you have to pay value of some kind. Good faith, that's the bigger draw on this question. Good faith isn't a scientifically quantified way in which we determine whether someone's done something in good faith, but they've outlined it pretty well in the text that the instrument is not known to be other than genuine, so we believe it to be genuine, that the transfer is proper, that someone, that there's no knowledge, that there's a defense to the claim, just as I said. And they gave a nice example here. It says, Abe issued a note to Lou, who negotiated the note to Bob. Abe claims a defense. Bob acted in good faith. He did not know the defense when he took the note. Bad faith is when a holder acts, knows the instrument was issued for services that were improperly done. Like, you knew all along that I didn't get my house painted correctly by the person I wrote the draft to, and there's a pending litigation over, her ladders crashing through my windows and the roof she damaged and all other kinds of problems in terms of the paint actually running out the house in the first rainstorm. Now if you're buying that note, you can't argue, hey, I'm a good faith purchaser, therefore I'm a holder in due course. I can sue Corman and not have certain defenses raised to me because you're a holder in due course. That's not true, because you were well aware of the defect in consideration or the argument of potential defenses being raised about the collectability of that note. Defenses, claims to lawsuit. And then that brings up the whole aspect of, well, what are the potential liabilities for the non-primary party? And we know that everybody gives the liability for warranties unless they sign the instrument without recourse and without warranties. But what warranties come in? The transferor is entitled to enforce the instrument. All signatures are genuine or authorized. The instrument was not altered. The instrument is not subject to a defense or claim of a party that can be asserted against that specific transferee. If that transferee has a defense against them, it's going to transfer as well. The transfer has no knowledge of any insolvency proceedings, basically bankruptcy, with respect to the banker, acceptor, or drawer of an unaccepted draft. Those are the warranties. Now the holder in due course. One of the things that throws people off, and I know I have an essay question up on the first exam, which I haven't posted yet, but say I see somebody, I'm going into the liquor store is probably not a good example because somehow that makes it bad faith, but let's assume I bump into a friend of mine I've known for a long time, and he goes, geez, the bank's closed today. Let's just assume for purpose of argument Sunday, the banks, but they need the money right away. They're leaving for Florida. They don't have any ability to get anything out of the ATM or anything like that. And they say, geez, Jim, I got a note for $5,000. I'll sell it to you for $4,500. Hey, it's a quick $500. I have to wait till Monday to cash it. I say, okay, sure. I buy it in good faith. I am a good faith purchaser, and now I want to present it for payment later on. What did that person, Bob, that I bumped into, warrant to me when they signed it to the pay to the order of Jim Corman or James Corman? They automatically warrant those things I just went over. All of those things are warranted. Now, if I go to collect it, and some of those things existed, insolvency proceeding, a claim against Bob, all of those other things, I can now basically sue Bob for breach of warranty. Now, let's go back to that fact pattern. Bob gives me the check for $4,500, and now, because I am very lazy, my kid's birthday is coming up, and so instead of being thoughtful and going out and buying a very nice gift for my son, I basically endorse the check to my son as a gift. Did my son pay good value? Could my son be a holder in due course? Well, not under those circumstances, right? Because what did he do? He didn't pay value for it. That's one of the required elements. But what's interesting is my son is, because he has no knowledge of any wrongdoing, and because the transfer to him was after a transfer of a holder in due course, the holder in due course stays with the instrument. Confuses a lot of people. So how I want you to think about that is, once holder in due course status has been established, it tends to stay with the instrument and doesn't get destroyed later, unless you can prove knowledge of insolvency or fraud or other instances of problems with the instrument showing lack of good faith. But if they take the instrument in good faith, even though they didn't pay value, the holder in due course stays, and we call that a holder through a holder in due course. I know, confusing, right? Over time, it sets in. And we know there's certain things when it comes to credit purchases, that those promissory notes related to purchasing item on credit, basically, that the holder in due courses are inapplicable to those kinds of sales because it affects certain consumer rights. So they can raise those things about defective goods even against a future holder, because historically the UCC started recognizing basically, fraudsters will go out, sell dysfunctional products to consumers, very expensive ones sometimes, and they would say, well, you don't have the cash right now, just sign this promissory note. Then what they would go do? They would go out and sell the promissory note to collection agencies or other basically paper buyers. That's what they're called. And they would go and try to enforce it against you. And you'd say, hey, but the this big, huge $5,000 oven I bought, it doesn't even work. I'm not paying for it. And they say, yeah, but you can't raise that defense to me, which is called lack of consideration, because I'm a holder in due course and I wasn't aware of that problem. We decided to protect the consumer a little bit more in this country. And so under the UCC, if the note is created as a consumer credit application for goods, for lack of a better way of saying it, the holder in due course status can't be raised for collection. Basically, we won't allow a holder in due course status to circumvent the avoidance of living up to certain basic contractual obligations that would exist in other realms. It's very big. It's for consumer goods or services. Now we have the different kinds of defenses. And why do we care about the different kinds of ones? Some are called limited defenses. They can't be used against a holder in due course. And then universal ones, which they can be. And then unfortunately, there are ones called hybrids that maybe they can be used against a holder in due course and maybe not. And so I just want you to get a basic theme. These cannot be used against a holder in due course. Ordinary contract defenses. And that would be the classic one. For example, I bought a car from you for $5,000 or $9,000. You said the car is great, runs, I get it. And it has a blown engine. Maybe you didn't know about it. It wasn't bad faith, but it basically is a lack of consideration. And so I'm not going to pay that note. But guess what? You no longer have the note. You sold it to some third party. That third party bought it in good faith without knowledge of any defect. Can they now collect it from me? Well, they'll try. And what would you think I'd use as a common sense defense? Hey, wait a minute. I shouldn't have to pay that $9,000 because the consideration was flawed. The car was defective. I can't raise that against a holder in due course. That's considered an ordinary contract defense. That's huge. And so basically they have a right to collect that from me. Now, do I have a right to go after the person who sold me the car for maybe a breach of warranty? Yes, but all we're talking about in this chapter, in this basic whole section, is the collectability in commercial paper. The other ones that are related to some of the defenses that these are called limited or personal defenses. Fraud in the inducement. Yeah, I meant to enter into the binding promise to pay or the draw of a check, but I was induced based upon false promises of a result that would occur. I was fraudulently induced. That can't be raised against a holder in due course. That's different than fraud in the execution. Fraud in the execution can be raised against a holder in due course. That's where I never even entered a contract knowingly. I thought I was signing a HIPAA release form with my doctor, or I thought I was signing an autograph, or I thought I was just signing my name so I could get admission to the movie theater or something. I don't know, or to check my coat on my way into the Hanover Theater. I didn't know I was signing a promissory note for $5,000. That defense can be used as against a holder in due course because that's a universal defense. Limited would be simply like, yeah, I meant to sign a note for $5,000, but I thought I was going to get this beautiful timeshare on the coast of Florida. It turns out to be in the middle of Florida in a really bad neighborhood, and it's not a resort at all, and I was induced to believe it was something else. That would be fully enforceable against me by a holder in due course that later bought that note or promissory note against me. Conditional delivery. That's when I give somebody a promissory note and goes, yeah, this is condition. You can't enforce this until you remove all the junk vehicles from the garage I bought from you. You don't remove all those junk vehicles, but in the meantime, you've negotiated an instrument to a third party. That third party comes to collect it. I can't raise it. Goes, oh, but that was a conditional promise. That was only going to be enforceable against me unless they remove all these junk cars from the lot. They never did it. Can't raise that because it's a personal defense. It's only related between me and the original obligated party. Obviously, I have a lawsuit against them, but the question is can the other party enforce the instrument against me? That's the thing that's difficult for us to comprehend. So that's conditional. Improper completion. I give a check to someone. I say, I'll fill in that amount. We'll figure it out later. I call them on the phone, tell them to put $1,800 down. They put $18,000 down. Somebody buys that note in good faith, not knowing of the incorrect completion of the document. That's fully enforceable against me. I have a claim, obviously, against the person that did the wrongdoing. But the question is the note or the draft enforceable against me? Yeah. Payment or part payment. Hey, I already paid that note a long time ago. That's why you always do what? If you have an IOU, someone give someone an IOU, you say to them, hey, I want an IOU. It's time to pay the $18,000 on the thing. It's okay. Give me back the note. And I actually have a note here somewhere. Take me an hour to look through my office. It looks nice behind me, but trust me, I'm extremely disorganized. You want that note back saying paid in full, stamp paid in full, because what could happen? Some holder in due course that gets it negotiated later can collect it, and you can't say, but I already paid it. You didn't pay it to me, and I have note evidencing that. That's why you sometimes demand, if the money's significant enough, if they can't produce the note, you still have the obligation to pay them potentially, but you might demand a security bond in case that kind of thing ever happens in the future. Non-delivery. I never intended to deliver that check. I wrote it on my desk. The person came by in the office. They grabbed it. I never intended to deliver it. I can't raise that against a holder in due course. And same with theft. That's the problem. Why having a fully executed instrument on your desk, if someone steals it, that's a problem. It's fully collectible by a holder in due course. Now, some that are universal defenses. Say the draft is written by a 17-year-old. Can they raise the defense of lack of capacity. Remember from Business Law 1, if you're under the age of majority, under the age of 18, unless it's for necessities, you know that minors can basically disaffirm or disqualify the enforceability of a contractual agreement. That's a universal defense. That can be raised against a holder in due course. Forgery can be, because all parties on transferring of instruments warrant that all signatures are genuine on the document. So therefore, forgery as a universal defense can be used against a holder in due course. Not fraud in the execution. Not fraud in the inducement, but fraud in the execution can be used as a universal defense. And discharge in bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a very powerful tool. The book does a nice job outlining those things there. And then the hybrid defenses. What the book is saying here is if in that state and under the law, the kind of event that underlies these defenses would make the contract a nullity, then it can be used against a holder in due course. If it just makes it subject to what we consider to be voidable as opposed to void, then it's a hybrid defense and it cannot be used against a holder in due course. And these relate to duress, basically under somebody's manipulation and control emotionally. That if in some jurisdiction that only makes a contract voidable and not void, if it's voidable, can't be raised against a holder in due course. If it's void in that jurisdiction, the defense can be raised also against a holder in due course. Incapacity other than minority, mental health issues, being out of, maybe early onset dementia, maybe you weren't lucid at that moment. If it makes the contract void in that jurisdiction, the defense is available. If it only makes it voidable, the defense is not available against a holder in due course. Illegality, most jurisdictions, if it's illegal, the nature of the obligation you've entered into, the contract isn't voidable, it's void. But in some jurisdictions, it might only make it voidable, and therefore it's not a defense to be raised against the holder in due course. And the same with alteration. Bit rambling. The book is very good. There's also a little summary I have up on the side on Blackboard that I think helps to explain it. And I think I have a video on holders and holders in due course from some YouTube presenters that I think are much better than I can ever be on commercial paper. Commercial paper is a tough topic, especially if we're not live in class having a discussion about it. I'll try to, if I don't have it up there, I'll certainly try to put one up there. Otherwise, be well.